Hey, what's up guys? So it's been about a month since I bought this NSX and I've been loving it. I've been driving it as much as I can, basically every week as long as it's dry outside. But being a car guy, I'm sure you guys can relate. I'm always looking for the next car to buy. So like I mentioned in the last video, I need your guys' help. The fact that I have an NSX again is great, but as you guys know, this one's again bone stock and it's not really set up for the track. And rather than modify this fully for track use, I've been considering just getting a new daily driver, or maybe just a new track car, or maybe some combination of both in one car. So this is where I need your guys' help. I have a number of criteria that I'm looking to meet, and I realize I probably can't fit all the criteria, but if there is some car out there that you guys can suggest, I'd love to hear about it. So first of all, it needs to be under 20 grand, new or used. I really don't want to spend more than that. In fact, I'd much rather spend closer to 10 grand. Tracking an expensive car is always going to be a risk. And I'd rather have the peace of mind knowing that if I wreck the car or whatever, or the engine blows up, it's not going to cost me an arm and a leg to get it replaced. Second criteria, it has to be rear wheel drive. I know that really limits my options, but I'm kind of a purist in that regard, and I really want to develop my skills as a driver so that I can become really comfortable with rear wheel drive, get used to oversteer, especially power oversteer, which is something you just can't get in a front wheel drive car. So that's one thing I'm going to be pretty stubborn about. I'm not 100% sold on only rear wheel drive. If you guys have any better suggestions of front wheel drive or all wheel drive cars that'll still give me that playful character, I'm all ears. Third criteria, and actually this probably should have been number one to be honest, is it has to have a manual transmission. I'm a purist. I prefer rowing my own gears. I like being able to heel tone downshift. Ultimately, I'm not in pursuit of the fastest possible lap times. I'm just looking to develop my skills as a driver while having a lot of fun. So number four, preferably, and I say preferably, it needs to have a back seat. If I do get a track car, it's probably also going to be my partial daily driver along with the NSX. And the NSX being a two-seater, I shouldn't get another two-seater, but if there's a really convincing argument for another two-seater, as long as it is practical for daily use, has more trunk space hopefully than the NSX, then I would consider that as well. So number five, I don't want a Miata. I know that's going to piss some of you guys off because it's the ultimate cheap track car. I mean, for under 10 grand, what else would you buy for a track car, right? But there's just something about the Miata that doesn't really excite me. I love the way it handles, but after owning a couple S2000s and a couple NSXs, even a Civic Si 99 that had 160 horsepower, Miata just isn't really going to cut it for me in terms of like really enjoying and being interested in the car. I want to track a car that I really enjoy driving and gives me the thrill of being able to accelerate at a modest pace, right? So Miata is just not really on my list right now. And number six, I would like it to be as reliable as possible. So with those criteria being said, I've considered a number of cars out there, so I'll just list those out for you guys. I have considered an E36 BMW M3, preferably in a sedan, but even the coupe has a somewhat reasonable back seat. I can find them for about 10 grand or a little cheaper with, let's say, around 100 to 130,000 miles, which I think is pretty reasonable. But then again, I've never owned an old BMW, so my main concern with these cars is obviously going to be the maintenance costs. And I know there's some pretty common issues, like the cooling system is pretty weak on these cars, and the suspension bushings, the rear subframe can often be an issue. They get worn out pretty easily. But these are known issues, and I'd be able to probably find a car that probably already has these issues corrected. But still, I'm a little worried about maintenance. Maybe some of you guys who have owned a BMW E36 M3 can chime in here. Another option I've considered is a used, either 2014, maybe even 2015 Subaru BRZ or Scion FRS, but I would prefer the Subaru. It does not make a whole lot of power at 200 horsepower, but I think that's probably my bare minimum at this point. I think I can still have fun on the straights with 200 horsepower. It's a pretty much an almost new car, so in terms of reliability, I don't think I'd have much to worry about. It gets great fuel economy. It has a stock LSD, so that in itself makes it a much better track car than some of the other options out there. My only real concern with that car is that since it is pretty new still, it's going to continue depreciating. The fact that I can even pick one up now with reasonable miles for 16 grand, I mean, that's just barely over half of what it was worth brand new. And the other thing with those is, even though it does have a back seat, it's pretty much useless unless you just fold it down and use it as extra trunk space. But as of now, it's still pretty high on my list because it meets a lot of the other factors I'm looking at. Another car I've been looking at, and I know this kind of goes against my own criteria, but I've been looking at a 987 first gen Porsche Cayman. Either a base Cayman or a Cayman S, as long as it's got a manual transmission. I know it's a two-seater, I know it's a mid-engine, it's not exactly the easiest car to work on, but from a trackability perspective, it meets a lot of the things I'm looking for. It's well-balanced, good steering feel, enough power, it's naturally aspirated, gets decent fuel economy, and I actually test drove one of these yesterday, and I was pretty pleasantly surprised with the amount of storage space it has, because it's got a pretty shallow trunk in the back, but it also has a deep trunk in the front, so that can actually fit probably a couple of small suitcases. But again, no back seat, and again, probably more important is the fact that it's an old German car, so maintenance, I don't know how reliable these cars are. I heard they're pretty reliable, but if something does break, you know, it's going to cost me quite a bit to get it back on the road. Before I bought the NSX, I was really considering getting a Porsche of some sort, either a pretty nice Cayman S or even a 911 Carrera S. I've just been itching to get a Porsche even after I bought the NSX. So I'd really like to hear some of you Porsche owners in terms of, I know I keep saying Porsche and then Porsche. It's Porsche, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. But anyway, I'm really interested in hearing what some of you Porsche owners have to say about the ownership experience. Nothing about the performance or anything like that, or the handling. I know Porsches are great for that. My only concern is the cost of ownership, especially if I do take it to the track, let's say 5-6 times a year. And I won't be putting crazy R compound tires and a ton of aero or anything on whatever car I do decide to get. It's just going to be a more casual track car that I'm not searching for ultimate lap times, but like I said, I'm just looking to have a lot of fun and improve my skills as a driver. So things like a baffled oil pan probably wouldn't be necessary because I will be running on street tires, so that's one more thing to consider. And of course, I know you guys would bring up the S2000 if I didn't, so I'm just going to bring it up. It really should be really high on my list, but just because I've owned a couple of S2000s and I've driven a bunch of modified ones, they're great, don't get me wrong, but I'm kind of looking to get a new experience, just something to give me a new perspective on ownership as well as track driving. So those are my options that I've considered for under 20 grand. But just to open up the forum, I guess, a little bit more, what can I get for, let's say, 25 to 30 grand? Does that really open my options up to a lot to where I can meet more of the criteria that I've set for myself? And in that space, I've considered a used E92 or E90 BMW M3, which would be a lot more practical than most of the cars I mentioned, and it's got more than enough power. At the same time, it is, again, sort of an old-ish BMW that's probably going to have really high maintenance costs and running costs because it is a V8 after all. And I also heard they have terrible brakes for the track, so I'd like to hear you guys' input on that as well. So that's it, guys. I'm not really in a rush to buy a new track car right now. I just wanted to, you know, put this video out there and see what you guys had in terms of suggestions, do's and don'ts. I'm really looking forward to reading the comments on this video because I know I said I've only been considering this for a couple of weeks, but to be honest, it's been on my mind for a while now, for a few months. So thanks in advance for the suggestions, guys. I think once I get a good number of suggestions out there, I'll make a follow-up video just explaining my thoughts on each of the suggestions that you guys have, and then yeah, we'll go from there, and hopefully in the next couple of months I'll have something I can take to the track.